My name's Chad, I'm 22, and if you're watching this, you're basically hearing the story of how my life flipped all at once. I work as a freelance photographer in the city. Nothing glamorous. Mostly wedding gigs, product shots for small online stores, the occasional portrait session someone books through social media. It pays sometimes. Other times, it barely covers gas and coffee. For a while, everything kind of balanced out because I had a roommate. We split the rent on this tiny apartment above a laundromat. It smelled like detergent and hot metal all the time, but it was cheap, and I didn't complain. Then one afternoon he just dropped it on me. His job offer in another state came through, and he was leaving in 2 weeks. At first, I thought I'd figure something out. I always kind of assume things will just work out if I keep moving. But then the landlord sent a new notice with updated rent. It wasn't updated. It was multiplied. Suddenly there was this number on the page that looked like a joke. I did the math 3 times, hoping I'd messed up. I hadn't. I remember sitting on the floor with stacks of envelopes around me, bills, late fees, random reminders, and this heavy feeling pressing on my chest. Like the room was shrinking. I didn't want to call my parents. I didn't want to admit I couldn't handle basic life stuff. I felt stuck, cornered, like I was slowly sliding towards something I couldn't afford to fall into. That's when my friend Steve called. We'd known each other since high school. Not the kind of friend you hang out with every day, but solid. The kind who shows up when you really need someone. I tried to joke about my situation, but I guess it was obvious my voice wasn't right. He just said, "Why don't you stay here for a while? We've got a spare room. Figure it out from there." I hesitated. Moving into someone else's house always feels like stepping into their world, their rules. But I didn't exactly have options. A few days later, I packed my camera gear, some clothes, and what was left of my pride, and drove out to his place in the suburbs. The house was quiet the first time I pulled into the driveway. Not silent in a creepy way, more like it breathed at its own pace. Steve helped me bring my stuff inside, showing me the spare room like it had been waiting there all along. His dad was gone on another business trip, which, apparently, was pretty normal. Always on planes, always somewhere else. And then there was his mom. Tiffany. She was 43, elegant without even trying. Not the overdone kind of elegant. More like everything about her was calm, deliberate. She moved in a way that made you pay attention without meaning to. She came down the stairs, smiled, and welcomed me like I wasn't some kid crashing because he couldn't afford rent anymore. I told myself not to notice anything beyond that. She was my friend's mom. End of story. But the thing is, some people have a presence. You feel them, even when they're just walking past you to grab a glass of water. The subtle perfume, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the quiet confidence she had. I caught myself looking away quickly, pretending I was focused on my boxes, pretending it didn't matter. That first night, I lay in the spare room staring at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the house, pipes, footsteps, doors softly closing. I should have been relieved. I had a place to stay. I had time. Instead, I felt like I'd just stepped into something bigger than I understood yet. And I already knew I was noticing her more than I wanted to admit. When I woke up the first morning in Steve's house, it felt strange in that polite way you feel when you're staying somewhere that isn't yours. The spare room was neat, too neat, like it had been staged for a guest who never actually arrived. I could smell coffee drifting from the kitchen, and for a second I almost forgot I wasn't in my old apartment. I walked in trying to look casual, like I'd been there for months instead of one awkward night. Tiffany was already there, leaning over the counter, scrolling through something on her tablet. She looked up, smiled in this calm, easy way, and said my name like I belonged there. That smile took a lot of the weirdness out of the room. She offered me breakfast, nothing fancy, just toast and eggs, and asked how I slept. Small talk. Simple stuff. But the more she spoke, the more the conversation stopped feeling like small talk. She asked about photography, about how I started, about the places I wanted to travel someday. Not in that polite, pretending to care way. She actually listened. And I noticed I was talking more than I usually do. Throughout the next few days, it was like that. Little kitchen moments. Quick chats while she wiped down the counter or poured herself tea. The kind of conversations that start ordinary, and then somehow drift into things that feel more personal than they should. She teased me sometimes, gently, like when she saw me struggling to carry my gear in one trip. "Traveling light, huh?" She laughed. I laughed back, probably louder than necessary, and felt stupid for how aware I suddenly was of every move I made. I caught myself watching the way she moved around the house, not in a staring way, just noticing. How she'd tuck one side of her hair behind her ear when she was thinking. How she carried herself like she knew exactly who she was. One afternoon, she asked if I could help her in the garage with a few boxes. Nothing dramatic. Just shifting things around that had apparently been sitting untouched for months. We worked side by side, dust floating in the sunlight like tiny sparks. At one point I lifted a heavier box than I should have, and she stepped closer, hands almost ready to help, even though I clearly had it. Our shoulders brushed, barely. It shouldn't have meant anything. But there was this tiny beat right after, like time slowed just enough for both of us to register it, then hurry forward again. We laughed it off, made some dumb joke about how the box was winning. Still, the moment stayed with me longer than it had any right to. Later that evening, she needed another favor, a couple of boxes from the hallway closet. We ended up kneeling on the floor, sorting through old photos, random souvenirs, little pieces of years gone by. She told me a story about a trip she took when she was younger, the way her eyes lit up while she talked, and I forgot where I was for a second. There was a quiet pause after one of her stories, the kind where you both realize you've said more than intended. Our eyes met, and neither of us looked away right away. Just a second too long. Barely noticeable. Enough to feel like something had shifted, even if we didn't acknowledge it. That night, lying in bed, the house felt different. Not louder. Not busier. Just alive. I kept seeing that moment in my head, the way she smiled, the way the air between us felt charged without either of us saying anything that would cross a line. I told myself it was in my imagination. That I was reading into things because I was stressed and grateful and lost. The week after that felt different, like the house had shifted its rhythm, and I was suddenly aware of every quiet moment. Steve was busy with work and friends, coming and going at random hours, and his dad was still out of town. That left a lot of time where it was just me and Tiffany moving around the same space, crossing paths in hallways, kitchens, doorways. Nothing obvious happened at first. No dramatic moments. Just a slow build-up of awareness. One afternoon she asked if I could help her with something upstairs. One of the curtain rods in her bedroom had come loose, and she said she didn't trust herself not to pull the whole thing down if she tried fixing it alone. I followed her up, telling myself it was just a task, just a normal favor. Her room felt different from the rest of the house. Softer. More personal. The light came in through the window at an angle that made everything feel quieter, almost private. I stood on a chair tightening the bracket while she hovered nearby, closer than necessary, handing me tools I hadn't asked for yet. She didn't rush. She watched. I could feel her presence behind me, not touching, but close enough that I was aware of every small movement. The faint sound of her breathing. The way the room seemed to hold on to the silence between our words. While I worked, we talked. At first about normal things. How often things in the house broke, how Steve never noticed details like this. Then the conversation drifted, like it had been doing more and more lately. She mentioned how quiet the house felt when her husband was gone. How she'd gotten used to being on her own more than she ever expected. There wasn't bitterness in her voice. Just honesty. A kind of tired openness that caught me off guard. "I'm around people all the time," she said softly, "but I still feel alone more than I should." I climbed down from the chair, my hands still dusty, and before I could stop myself I said, "You don't seem like someone who should feel that way." The words hung there between us. She looked at me then, really looked at me, like she was trying to decide something. There was a small smile on her face, but her eyes were serious. For a moment neither of us moved. The space between us felt smaller than it actually was. Nothing happened. No sudden movement. No lines crossed. But something had already shifted. After that, I started noticing things I hadn't before. How she lingered in conversations just a bit longer. How she'd ask me about my day, not out of politeness, but like she genuinely wanted to know. How sometimes our eyes would meet and neither of us would look away immediately. I tried reminding myself where I was. Whose house this was. Who she was. I told myself that I was reading into things because I was vulnerable, because my life felt unstable and I was clinging to comfort wherever I found it. Still, the boundaries didn't feel as solid as they once had. One evening, I caught her standing in the doorway of the kitchen, watching me scroll through photos on my camera. She asked to see them, leaned in close as I showed her a recent shoot. Her shoulder brushed mine, and this time neither of us pretended it hadn't happened. She stepped back first, clearing her throat, changing the subject. But the air felt heavier after that, like something unspoken had taken up residence between us. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling again, replaying the day. The conversation in her room. The way she'd looked at me. The silence that said more than words ever could. The evening it finally happened didn't feel dramatic at first. No storm outside, no music playing, nothing cinematic. It was just quiet. Steve had gone out with friends, said he wouldn't be back until late. His dad was still traveling. The house felt bigger than usual, like it had more space than it needed. I was in the living room editing photos on my laptop when Tiffany walked in carrying 2 glasses and a bottle of wine. She smiled like it was nothing unusual, like it was just something people did when they had company. "You look like you've been staring at that screen for hours," she said. "Take a break." I laughed and closed the laptop, maybe a little faster than necessary. We sat on opposite ends of the couch at first, talking about normal things, work, the neighborhood, small memories that somehow turned into longer stories. The wine loosened the edges of the conversation. Not messy, not wild. Just softer. At one point she went quiet, looking at the glass in her hand. "Do you ever feel like you're just surviving?" she asked. The question surprised me. I wasn't used to adults saying things like that out loud. I nodded and told her about rent, gigs falling through, the pressure of pretending everything was fine. She listened, really listened. Then she told me more than I expected, about the distance in her marriage, the empty dinners, the feeling of being seen only when something needed fixing. There wasn't bitterness in her voice, just the kind of tired honesty that made my chest feel tight. We laughed again eventually, about something small, but the mood had already changed. The room felt warmer. Quieter. Our knees brushed when she shifted closer, and this time neither of us apologized or pretended it didn't happen. We sat like that for a moment, not touching anywhere else, but aware of every inch between us. "If this feels strange," she said softly, "we can stop talking here." Her voice wasn't commanding. It was careful. Protective almost, like she was trying to give both of us an exit. I swallowed, feeling my heart in my throat. "I don't want to stop," I said, and I meant more than the conversation. There was a silence that didn't feel empty at all. She searched my face, as if checking whether I understood that there was no way back from whatever came next. "Do you want this to stop before it starts?" she asked again, almost whispering. I shook my head. She moved closer, slow enough that I could have leaned away if I wanted. I didn't. Her hand touched my cheek first, gentle, steady, and then her lips brushed mine, not rushed, not hungry, just unmistakable. A decision, not an accident. The world didn't explode. There were no fireworks. Just a quiet, steady realization that something had crossed a line that had been waiting for days. When we finally pulled back, we didn't jump apart. We stayed close, breathing the same air, like the space had been rearranged and we both needed a second to understand it. "This changes things," she said. "I know. We didn't talk about Steve. We didn't talk about right or wrong. We just sat there with what we'd done, letting the reality sink in." Her hand stayed in mine. The TV hummed in the background with some show either of us was watching. After that night, everything fell into a strange kind of pattern. Not routine exactly, more like a quiet understanding that settled between us without ever being spoken out loud. Nothing was announced. No rules laid out. We just knew. During the day, the house looked the same as it always had. Steve came and went, complained about work, joked about food disappearing from the fridge. I edited photos, sent invoices, tried to pretend my life hadn't split into two versions of itself. One that everyone saw, and one that only existed when certain doors were closed. The signals were small, almost invisible. A look held half a second too long. A hand brushing mine when she passed behind me in the kitchen. A message on my phone that looked harmless if anyone glanced at it, but meant everything to me. When Steve wasn't home, the house felt different. Not empty, claimed. Like the walls themselves were in on the secret. We'd find excuses to be near each other. Folding laundry at the same time. Sharing coffee early in the morning when the sun hadn't fully come up yet. Those mornings were my favorite. We'd sit at opposite ends of the table, pretending there was distance between us, but her foot would slide against mine under the table, slow and deliberate. Just enough to make me lose my train of thought. She'd smile into her mug like she knew exactly what she was doing. And she did. The nights came quietly. No rush. No drama. Just doors closing softly, lights dimmed low, voices kept at a careful volume. What happened between us never needed words. It was confident now, less hesitant than before. Less questioning. Like we'd both crossed something and accepted it without needing to explain ourselves. She'd rest her forehead against mine afterwards sometimes, breathing steady, eyes closed, like she was memorizing the moment. Other times she'd laugh quietly, shaking her head like she couldn't believe this was real. One night, while we lay there listening to the house settle, she whispered, "You've woken me up after years of silence." The words stayed with me. I told her she wasn't invisible. That she never had been. I meant it more deeply than I could explain. Being with her felt grounding. Like everything chaotic in my life suddenly had a center. But there was always the edge. The awareness that this existed in stolen moments. That it depended on timing, on silence, on doors staying shut. Sometimes I'd hear Steve's car pull into the driveway when I wasn't expecting it, and my heart would jump into my throat. We got good at separating quickly, at turning back into normal versions of ourselves. Careful didn't mean distant though. If anything, the danger pulled us closer. Made every touch count. Made every moment feel intentional. We weren't pretending it didn't matter. We just weren't ready to say out loud what it was becoming. One evening, as she stood at the sink washing dishes, she looked over her shoulder at me and said, almost casually, "You know this is dangerous." I nodded. Yeah. She didn't ask me to stop. I didn't offer to. The guilt didn't hit all at once. It crept in quietly, settling into the empty spaces between moments. At first, everything still felt the same, the looks, the messages, the way we found each other when the house allowed it. But underneath that rhythm, something had changed. Tiffany started pulling back in small ways. Not cold. Just careful. She'd pause before replying to messages. She'd hold me for a moment longer afterward, like she was trying to memorize the feeling instead of living in it. One evening, she asked me to sit with her in the living room. No wine this time. No distractions. Just the two of us, and the low hum of the house around us. "We can't keep lying," she said quietly. "It's too dangerous." I didn't argue. That's how I knew it was real. If it had been just a thrill, I would have tried to convince her otherwise. But I saw it in her face, the weight of what we were risking, the people who would get hurt if this went wrong. She told me she hadn't slept well in weeks. That she hated herself for enjoying something that lived in secrecy. That she didn't regret us, but she was starting to lose herself in the hiding. I told her I understood, even though part of me didn't want to. The goodbye wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No sudden decisions. Just tears she didn't bother wiping away. Hands holding on longer than they needed to. Kisses that felt less like beginnings and more like acknowledgments of what we were giving up. When I packed my things a few days later, Steve didn't question it much. I told him I'd found a temporary place closer to work, which wasn't entirely a lie. He helped me load my car, joked about how quiet the house would be without me. Tiffany stayed upstairs. I didn't see her that morning. Driving away felt unreal, like I'd stepped out of a life that didn't officially exist. The city swallowed me again. Cheap rooms, long nights editing photos, trying to rebuild something stable. Months passed. No messages. No calls. I told myself that silence was the point. That it meant we were doing the right thing. But some connections don't fade just because you stop feeding them. I saw her again by accident. I was sitting in a cafe one afternoon, killing time between shoots, when she walked in. Same calm presence. Same quiet confidence. Our eyes met before either of us could pretend not to notice. She smiled first. We talked like people who had never ended anything properly. Carefully at first. Then more honestly. We didn't apologize. We didn't explain. We just acknowledged the truth sitting between us. I never regretted it, she said. Me either. There were no promises made that day. No plans laid out. Just the understanding that whatever had happened between us hadn't burned out. It had only gone quiet. When we stood to leave, she touched my arm, the same way she always had, and the spark was still there. Older now. Wiser. Still dangerous. Some stories don't end cleanly. They wait. And sometimes, when the timing finally shifts, they begin again, not because they should, but because they never really stopped.